Well, I mentioned earlier before that starting literally today, I'm going to start going through questions that people have, and these aren't necessarily by priority or anything other than I had to start somewhere, and I thought this might be a good place to start. The question was, how do you lose your life? And what does that mean? What does that look like? And so we're going to address that, but I also want to say, why would you want to? Why would you want to lose your life? So if you want to turn with me to Matthew chapter 10, verses 5 through 39, we'll read through that and then jump into this here. Just to give you a little context. So this was Jesus, just a little context. Jesus was sending out his 12 disciples. He actually had just called them together, called them by name, and he was sending them out. And he was giving them instructions. And so when we read in 5, we're starting his instructions, and it's almost all his instructions. I cut it short a few verses, but we'll get a context of that. Some of these things are very specific instructions to that trip that he was sending them on, but some I think we can glean from. And then also, I'm not going to talk about all of his instructions. I'm purely looking for things that talk about losing our life and what that means and looks like. So, starting Matthew 10, starting verse 5, these 12 Jesus sent out after instructing them. Here's his instructions. Do not go in the way of the Gentiles, and do not enter any city of the Samaritans, but rather go to the lost sheep of the house of Israel. And as you go, preach, saying, the kingdom of heaven is at hand. Heal the sick, raise the dead, cleanse the lepers, cast out demons. Freely you received, freely give. Do not acquire gold or silver or copper for your money belts, or a bag for your journey, or even 2 coats or sandals or a staff, for the worker is worthy of his support. And whatever city or village you enter, inquire who is worthy in it, and stay at his house until you leave that city. As you enter the house, give it your greeting. If the house is worthy, give it your blessing of peace. But if it is not worthy, take back your blessing of peace. Whoever does not receive you nor heed your words, as you go out of that house or that city, shake the dust off your feet. Truly I say to you, it will be more tolerable for the land of Sodom and Gomorrah in the day of judgment than for that city. Behold, I send you out as sheep in the midst of wolves, so be shrewd as serpents and innocent as doves. But beware of men, for they will hand you over to the courts and scourge you in their synagogues, and you will even be brought before governors and kings for my sake, as a testimony to them and to the Gentiles. But when they hand you over, do not worry about how or what you are to say, for it will be given you in that hour what you are to say. For it is not you who speak, but it is the Spirit of your Father who speaks in you. Brother will betray brother to death, and a father his child, and children will rise up against parents and cause them to be put to death. You will be hated by all because of my name, but it is the one who has endured to the end who will be saved. But whenever they persecute you in one city, flee to the next, for truly I say to you, you will not finish going through the cities of Israel until the Son of Man comes. A disciple is not above his teacher, nor a slave above his master. It is enough for the disciple that he become like his teacher, and the slave like his master. If they have called the head of the house Beelzebub, or the ruler of demons, how much more will they malign the members of his household? Therefore, do not fear them, for there is nothing concealed that will not be revealed, or hidden that will not be known. What I tell you in the darkness, speak in the light, and what you hear whispered in your ear, proclaim upon the housetops. Do not fear those who kill the body, but are unable to kill the soul, but rather fear him who is able to destroy both soul and body in hell. Are not 2 sparrows sold for a cent, and yet not one of them will fall to the ground apart from your Father? But the very hairs of your head are all numbered. So do not fear. You are more valuable than many sparrows. Therefore, everyone who confesses me before men, I will also confess him before my Father who is in heaven. But whoever denies me before men, I will also deny him before my Father who is in heaven. Do not think that I came to bring peace on the earth. I did not come to bring peace, but a sword. For I came to set a man against his father, and a daughter against her mother, and a daughter-in-law against her mother-in-law. And a man's enemies will be the members of his household. He who loves father or mother more than me is not worthy of me, and he who loves son or daughter more than me is not worthy of me. And he who does not take his cross and follow after me is not worthy of me. He who has found his life will lose it, and he who has lost his life for my sake will find it. So if I told you that you could have anything in the world that you wanted, would you be interested? But the catch is, you have to lose your life to get it. Well, it's not so appealing anymore, is it? You think about that. All of a sudden you think, well, if I gave up my life, I wouldn't get the very thing that I wanted, or I put it on my dead body. It wouldn't do any good. We value life, right? And more specifically, just to be clear, we value our own life. And so what Jesus is saying here, he says we have to, in order to find life, verse 39 specifically, he says we have to give it up. And that doesn't make a lot of sense when you think about it. I mean, we talk about it a lot, but what is he really talking about? So what's he talking about when he says we have to lose our life? Why would we want to take him up on this offer? Those are my first two questions. And then thirdly, if we do want to lose our lives, how do we do that? What's that look like? So let me take those one at a time. First of all, what is Jesus talking about when he says we have to lose our life? The key concept, what Jesus is talking about, I think is actually found a few chapters later in Matthew 16:24, when he is talking again to his disciples, and he says, if anyone wishes to come after me, he must deny himself. Now, he says more than that, but I think that key phrase right there is denying ourselves, or losing our life. I think that's an overall summary of losing our life. Deny yourself, and you're going to see what's it look like to lose your life. Now, this interesting thing is this is written so much on our hearts that it's like almost the storyline of every story, of every fairy tale. This heroic story of someone giving up their life so that someone else could live. Giving yourself away for the love of someone else. Here's an example. Frozen. I could tell you, sing all the songs, and what you see here is this, this sister. Remember, they always thought it's like, oh, she's got to kiss the boy, right? And that's the true act of love. But it wasn't it. It was giving up the life. And giving up life, what happened? She actually found her life. It's not just in Frozen movies. Certainly, we just talked about the 15th anniversary of September 11th. Just went to a pancake breakfast at the fire department. And what happened on September 11th, 2001, when everyone was fleeing from the building when it was on fire, there were some people that were running into the building. They were running into danger. And that's really, the fire department, as well as police and other rescue people, they're the kind of people who really demonstrate that. And they might get it, even if they're not believers. Again, it's written on our hearts, whether we acknowledge sort of the spiritual aspect of it or not. It's there. Why are our hearts so drawn to this storyline? It's because God has put it there. He's put it there. And so we see the greatest storyline is Jesus Christ himself. He said, his own words in John 15:13, greater love has no one than this, that one laid down his life for his friends. Later he said, you are my friends if you do what I command. So Jesus modeled this, what it meant to sacrifice, to give up your life for the gain of others. But he modeled it even before, the day before this happened, Friday, we call Good Friday. It wasn't so good for him, but it was good for the rest of us. The day before this happened. It was the Garden of Gethsemane, Thursday night, the night before. And these are really key words, I think, when we talk about losing our life and what that means. This came out of Matthew 26, there's a parallel passage, but it said Jesus was praying to his Father, and he said, my Father, if it is possible, let this cup pass from me. Now, the cup he's talking about is the very thing he was heading to. This was the cup he was talking about. He knew what was going to happen. He was in the garden praying. He was asking the Lord, if it's possible, let this pass without me having to do it. Find some other way. There's got to be some other way. If it's possible, I don't want to do this, is what Jesus is saying. If it's my choice, I don't want to do it. But then how does he end his prayer? He says, yet not as I will, but as you will. See, Jesus, there's no better model to look at in losing your life than Jesus. He literally lost his life for us. In other words, he said, if there's no other way, if this is the way it has to be, Lord, I trust you. God, my Father, literally my Father, I trust you. Not what I want, not what I will, but you will. And so reality is, and not to trivialize this or not to put it on the same level, but I think anytime we do something for someone instead of ourselves, even one little thing, we see a glimpse of the decision that Christ made in Gethsemane. He said, not what I will, but what you will. Again, not trying to put them on equal planes, but if you do the dishes for your roommate, when you're just frustrated because they're all his or her dirty dishes, or your wife's, or your kids', just an example. Anytime you do that, they're saying, no, I am giving up my life. Anytime you serve someone else when you'd rather be doing something else, you give up your life. Now, even when I say that, I have to be careful because what happens is people walk around with what I call martyrdom syndrome, where they're like giving up their life and they're making sure you know about it. Oh man, you know how much I sacrificed for you. You know what I did this for you. Or they don't say it, they just think it, and it comes out in their life. Jesus didn't do that. He didn't do it as like a weapon, a tool to be like, hey, if I do all these things, all the ways I've served you, now I can come back and use it later. No, it's just doing it. And that's where we can't judge hearts. I mean, it's totally up to God, but we see glimpses of that. First John 3:16, a great verse here. We know love by this. How do we know love? What is love? We know love that He laid down, he's talking about Jesus Christ, laid down His life for us. And because He did that, because Jesus Christ laid down His life for us, He lost His life, we ought to lay down our lives for the brethren, for the brothers and sisters, for the family of God. That's what we've been talking about this morning. And so that's the Apostle John who wrote that letter. He got it. He understood it because he saw it. He saw Jesus Christ lay down His life for him. You know what John and the other disciples did when Jesus Christ was laying down His life? They ran away. They weren't backing Him up. They weren't saying, let me go with you. I mean, they said it beforehand. They said all the words. Well, Peter, I'll go with you too. I'll die with you. Oh, you're gonna deny me 3 times, Jesus said. And that's what happened. So John, the guy who wrote this, he knew it. This wasn't just words. This wasn't like something he learned in seminary. His rabbi, his teacher, his greatest friend gave up his life for him. And he said, because he did that, we should lay down our lives for one another. John got it. Well, the second question then is, why would we want to take Jesus' offer? Why would we want to take Him up on this offer of laying down our lives? And this is okay, so it's great. Praise the Lord that He laid down His life for us. We can thank Him for that, and it's so good. And if we can choose to lay down our life for someone else, it's one of the most noble, heroic things that can happen. But that's like, okay, I still lose my life in that deal, right? So why would we want to have this sort of exchange? And it's really just kind of our life or Jesus' life. See, our life, when we try to hold on to our life, what we're really clinging to is a life that is marred by this little problem called sin, called the sin nature. And so in our life does not match up to God's standards. Our life does not get us into heaven. There's eternal destiny regardless, but it does not get us into eternal life with God the Father. So clinging to our life is really short-sighted. Like, I want this, and I want this, and I want this. This is my life, and I'm going to work really hard for it. And then I'm going to die, and someone else is going to get to enjoy it. Ecclesiastes tells us. And so we can hold on to our life. But if we get to this point, and I pray that we're all at this point, and if not, I pray today is that point, where we acknowledge that our life does not measure up to God's standards. And when we get to that point, and we say, Lord, take my life. It's useless to me. It doesn't mean anything because everything I grab right now is just going to be for short term. Everything I have, Lord, it's yours. You're the only hope I have. There's nowhere else to turn to. All I have is you, Jesus. Here's my life. When we get to that place, and God really can start to do things in our lives, that's where it begins. And this is, sometimes it's called the great exchange. We exchange basically our crappy, broken life for Jesus' perfect, sinless life. And I don't know why that's a good deal for Him, but it's a good deal for us. I can tell you why, but that's another message. So we give up this life. We get the perfect life of Jesus. We get that put on. We get adopted into God's family. We get this great inheritance of riches. And you think about, why would we want to take Jesus up? Why would we want to give up our life? Because what we get back in return is far, far better. There's no comparison. But sometimes we don't see it until after we do it. See, sometimes you think, well, I know that sounds great. That's like, I want to go to heaven and all, but what about like right now? Like, I want to live in a nice house and drive a nice car and, and these kind of things. It really does not matter. I was talking to my wife today, yesterday, sometime. I was like, how blessed we are? Like I just look around our life and just even like physical blessings. Like, we're so blessed. And has nothing to do with what we've earned or how we've made it. I mean, I don't know if you know, but if you're your career ambition is to be a part-time pastor, it's not like you're doing it for the money, right? the reality is that God just continues to pour blessings upon us. If he had just given us Jesus Christ's life and that's it, like we just accept Christ's life and then we live the rest of our life on the street in poverty and dirt and begging, bedridden with fleas, that would be enough. It would be like, it's that worth it. But he's just such a good father. He just keeps pouring on more blessings upon us. So it's an amazing exchange. Why wouldn't we want to make that exchange? I can't give you another more reasons than that. Like it only makes sense, but only after you do it does it make sense. Which takes me to the third question. If we do want to lose our lives, then how do we do that? And I want to give you, these are people that like practical things, and that's me. I'm very practical, sometimes too practical. Sometimes I forget like, oh yeah, it's not what I do. It's all Jesus. But you want some practical things about what does it mean to lose your life? I think Jesus talked about a lot of things in here. I'm going to give you the ABCs and then the D and the E thrown in there for losing our lives and what that looks like. The first is there's some things that Jesus talked about avoiding. One is avoiding what I describe as chasing the world. Now in verse 9 he says, do not acquire gold or silver or copper for your money belts. Now he's talking about a specific trip. But in Luke 9:25, that other place I referenced, he says a little more clearly. He says, what is man profited if he gains the whole world and loses or forfeits himself or his soul? In other words, he's doing everything he can to gain everything in the world, but he gives up his own soul in the meanwhile. It's chasing of the world. So it's not about like, oh, making money is evil or that it's terrible if you have a good career, you make good money. Not at all. In fact, the Lord wants you to do well. It's a sign of his working in your life. But we need to avoid chasing the world. Again, it goes back to the heart. It's how are we responding in our heart? Is that our motivation? Is that our goal? Is that our drive and our desire to go after everything the world has? So we want to avoid that. We also want to avoid worrying about what to say. Jesus says there's a few verses there. 19 and 20, Jesus said, don't worry when they hand you over about what you'll say. It will be given to you. Verse 20 is probably the best verse for that, though. It is not you who speak. It is the Spirit of your Father who speaks in you. Don't worry about what you say when you come upon those moments and people ask you those questions and you have those hard times. Now, I'll say this doesn't mean like don't prepare. I could just say, well, I'm just going to come Sunday morning and what the Lord's going to tell me, He's going to tell me. But the reality is, I think that's not honoring your time. I don't think it's honoring God's Word. I'm not speaking against preparation, but recognizing that you're going to run into moments where the preparation you need to have is on your knees weeks, hours, days before. And then the Lord, His Spirit, will give you those words. So you don't have to worry about what to say. And then the part I'd throw into that, I guess, is verse 27, is to speak up. Jesus said, what I tell you in the darkness, speak in the light. What you hear whispered in your ear, proclaim upon the housetops. When God gives you these little promptings, these little nudges, and you're like, man, I should say something. I should raise my hand. I should speak up. We need to do it. I went to a city council meeting. Was that Tuesday already? Yeah, it felt like 4 weeks ago, but Tuesday, about an issue in the city that was, I would determine a privacy issue or a personal rights issue. And I went, Blake asked me to go, and I was just going to go, but I'm like, well, I'm here. I should say something. So I did. I didn't want to, but I did because I figured, hey, I'm here. And there's a sense of, okay, if it's important enough to show up, it's important enough to speak up. And that could happen in a classroom, it could happen at work, it could happen defending someone else. So we got to be willing to speak up, and then just let the Lord work in us. Okay, so avoid fearing enemies. It sounds obvious, but Jesus said people are going to be against you. It said, verse 26, do not fear them. There's nothing concealed. Verse 28, he said, do not fear those who kill the body, but are unable to kill the soul. And then verse 31, in case you didn't get it, so, therefore, in other words, he says, what I'm telling you is, third time, do not fear. You're more valuable than many sparrows. So we need to avoid fearing, chasing the world, worrying about what to say, and fearing. Now, B, what are some things we're to be? We are to be sent. This is the very heart of Jesus. Jesus did not kind of sit up in heaven next to the Father's throne and say, okay, God, let's just send them a message and tell them if they want to come to us that they can just come. No, Jesus went to where they were. He met them as us. He went to where we were, met us where we're at. He still does that today. And so Jesus, when he had the 12 disciples, he sent them out. He said, go now. Like, you've been with me. I've been teaching you. Now go and share this with people. So if you want to be someone who loses your life, we have to be sent people. And it doesn't always mean on the other side of the world, but I don't think that we have to exclude that right away. But we should be sent. I think another thing we should be is generous. Jesus said, freely receive, freely give. We talk about the great exchange we've just been given through Jesus Christ. We've been given not only eternal life, but all these other blessings on top of it. How could we not be generous? How could we not freely give? If we've lost our life, if our life is not ours anymore, who cares if we give it away? And what are we holding on to it for? So we should be generous people. We should also be like Jesus. Jesus said, if it's enough for the disciple to become like his teacher. Well, teacher. Who are you modeling after? Who are you following? I pray that you have someone in your life who either has or is discipling you, mentoring you, pouring into you. But if you, at the end of the day, if you look like that person, it's a failure. Hopefully that person is saying, hey, like Jesus, like Paul did, follow me as I follow Christ. 1 Corinthians 11:1. Not, hey, look what I'm doing and model me, but follow Jesus. Look like Jesus. We are supposed to be like our teacher. And if we're not, we have to say, well, who are we following? Who are we going to be like? Another thing to be fearful of God. I said, don't fear our enemies, but it is good to be fearful of God. That goes into context. Jesus said, verse 28, don't fear those who kill the body, but fear him who is able to destroy both body and soul in hell. See, we all will have a certain, come to our own personal judgment day. We have to stand before the Lord and say, Lord, here's who I am. Here's who I believe in. Here's my life. And you say, well, what do you have? What do you have that would let me into this throne room, into heaven? And everybody say, well, look at all these things I did. Well, God will say, well, look at all these bad things you did. And then he pull out this huge file. Yeah, but I gave all this money. I was generous because I listened to this message that said I should be generous. Look at all this money I gave away. Yeah, well, look at all this money you kept for yourself. I mean, there's no way we're going to ever win this battle. And then Jesus will just step in and say, okay, stop trying to defend yourself. I did this for you. And so the fear of God, sometimes we don't like to talk about it. We talk about the love of God, but the fear of God is important because there is a judgment day. We are going to have to face that, and we should be a little bit afraid of that. Now, if we have Jesus Christ, if we've accepted him and let him take it on his life, if we've done the great exchange, I'm not saying like live in fear of that because he's got it taken care of. But we need to be thinking about that, like as we live our life. And when we go before God, we still have to give account for every word we speak, every action we do. Just because Jesus has it doesn't mean God isn't going to say, well, what about that? It's still going to be there. So we need to be fearful of God. And then last one is a little weird grammatically, but be loving Christ more than family. In other words, family is great. We homeschool our children. We just went to a homeschool weekend, family camping weekend, and everyone's talking about family. And family is a building block of society, as goes the family, so goes the culture. I agree with all these things, but then Jesus said, you know what? If you think family is like what it's all about, you're missing something. Are you willing to leave your family for my sake? Are you willing, to let your family die for my sake? Sometimes we kind of put it backwards in that way. So we have to be willing to love Christ more than family. There's the A, there's the B. Now, the C is simply this, continue to the end. Jesus said, it's not just enough to sort of say, hey, I'm going to give up my life today, and then tomorrow I'm going to take it back up again and do what I want. No, it's continue to the end, all the way, completely lose your life. The D then is this, there's some dangers. One danger, Jesus said, I send you out as sheep in the midst of wolves. I don't know if anybody ever grew sheep. You have gone on a sheep farm or something? Any sheep farmers here? If you ever take a sheep and then put it in the middle of wolves, you can probably use your imagination. Like, that's not, if I liked my sheep, I wouldn't do that. But Jesus said, I'm sending you as sheep in the midst of wolves. That sheep is not going to do so well. In other words, he's not saying, behold, I send you out in this very safe environment where no one will ever get hurt and you won't, no one will say swear words and there will be no danger. He didn't say that. He said, be ready. That's it. As shrewd as serpents and innocent as doves. There's going to be danger. He didn't promise us this like safe, cushy life. It's not all about car seats and seatbelts. There's danger in this life. There's going to be danger. And ultimately it comes to this. He said, take up your cross and follow me. Take up your cross and follow me. And that's, again, when we kind of live in the church, we just take up your cross. We sing about it, but like the cross was an instrument of death. He's saying, take up your instrument of death and follow me, because I'm going to die, and I need you to come with me and die too. And that's what it looks like. This is not like some safe, like I like the cookies on Sunday morning type of following God. This is like losing my life. He makes it pretty clear there. And lastly then, the E is enemies. Well, of course, if there's danger, there's going to be enemies. He said you're going to be persecuted. Now, don't look for persecution. Don't be like trying to pick a fight, but be ready for it. He also said you're going to be hated because of my name. Now, I have to clarify. Sometimes we're hated because we're stupid. Sometimes we're hated because we're not likable people. Sometimes we're hated because of what we do, and then because we happen to follow Jesus, we say, oh, I'm suffering for Jesus' sake. No, you're not. You're suffering because you're an idiot, and you just deal with it. Like, confess that and recognize that. But there are times that we do suffer for being a Christ follower. And I'll give this example anyway. So Beatrice just lost her job because she took a stand for a biblical issue, and she got fired. Like it wasn't because they didn't like her, because she was sassy. It was because of her faith. Like that is what we have to be ready to do, and ready to see that happening. If they hated Christ, they're going to hate us. Now, again, don't equate everybody that hates you with that, but recognize that that is a reality. If we're giving up our life, we're going to see some of that. And so the last part of that is, Jesus said, this is strong words when you stop and think about it. Sometimes it's better just to read the Bible and don't stop and think, because he said in verse 32, he said, everyone who confesses me before men, I will also confess him before my Father who is in heaven. Now remember, our only chance of getting to heaven is Jesus Christ stepping in and saying, hey, I'll vouch for that guy, right? Or girl. And so he says, if you confess me before men, if you stand up for me and say, I'm following that guy, I will confess him before my Father in heaven. But verse 33 says, whoever denies me before men, I will also deny him before my Father who is in heaven. Wow, those are strong words. Now I have hope because I know that the disciples ran away from Jesus, and Peter denied him 3 times, and Jesus Christ in his grace reinstated him and asked him if he loved him. It was painful for Peter. It was not a fun process. There's hope and there's grace there, but I don't think I want to be in that position where it'd be like, well, I denied Christ and now I'm just kind of trusting in that grace. Those are very strong words. So I'm not going to try and weaken them. That's just what he said. So here's the reality behind this. If we want to lose our lives, I pray that we do. I pray that I've made that case, but if we do, we've got some things, right? Jesus has said there's some things to avoid and some things to be. We need to continue to the end. It's not just a one-day thing. There's dangers, there's enemies, and this is all part of losing our life. It's not. I'm not trying to sugarcoat it. We're talking about death here, death to ourselves and our desires. But in the end, it comes down to this. It comes to us. Will we lose our lives? Will we make that decision? Will we take those steps that are needed? And it's between you and the Lord to know what those are. Between us or our will or our desire, so that dies, and we can partake in that great exchange that Christ is offering us. And again, it's more than a salvation issue. If you have not taken that great exchange, if you have not accepted Christ's life for your life, I pray that happens right now. It doesn't have to be anything magical, no magical words, but just before you and the Lord say, yes, I want to do that. But if you already have, it's not like, oh, I did that and it's done. Like, we have to daily say, yes, Lord, I'm laying down my life again. I'm giving it to you again. I'm taking up your life. I'm laying down my life. I'm giving it up. We have to choose that today. We'll have to choose it tomorrow. We'll have to choose it on Tuesday. Every day we have to choose to lay down our life and give it to Christ. So, I don't know about you, but when I think about that, I think I need some help. So let me just go before the Lord, pray for us, that the Lord would give us strength to do what we need to do. Lord God, you call us to come and die. It's a really neat, churchy sounding thing, but it's pretty serious when we look at it. You've asked us to give up our life, to give up our rights, to give up the things we love, the most nearest and dearest to us, for you. And that you promise that you are worth it. Lord, we've seen it. It's laid out. You've made it very clear and through your word this morning what it means to give up our lives for you. There's good and there's bad. But Lord, I pray for those of us here in this room who have a desire to do that, that you would give us the strength, that you give us the wisdom, the boldness to do what we need to do, to kill the things in our life that need to be killed, so that you can have it. And you can have our whole life. Not just part of it, not just the Sunday morning part, but all of it. And Lord, I pray for anyone here in this room who has never made that decision to make the great exchange, to give up our pathetic life for your perfect, beautiful life. Lord, I pray that at this moment in time that they would make that decision. And not because I'm mentioning it or because it's a Sunday morning and we're in church, but because you're speaking to their heart right now, Lord. I ask that you would, through your Spirit, convict each and every one of us of what it is we need to do or not do, or to be or not be, so that we can stop living our lives and start living yours. Lord, show us that today, show us that tomorrow, and the next day, and the next, until we get to walk with you face to face. I pray in Jesus' name.